Why are you ignoring me? I've decided not to talk to people I don't know. I get it. I'll move out of my in-laws' place. They're totally ignoring me. I expected it from my mother-in-law, but I never thought my father-in-law would treat me this way. There's a reason why my in-laws, who used to be nice, changed. It's because of my sister-in-law who doesn't like me. Ever since she came back home, our peaceful life together has been completely messed up. Don't expect me to regret it, okay? You think I'm gonna feel sorry about this? Think again, jerk. I packed my stuff and left my in-laws' house. And guess what? Just 3 days after I left, their house turned into chaos. I met my husband at work. He worked in sales and came to my office often, and I was the main person he dealt with. As we spent more time together in meetings and chats, I started to like him. He was caring and kind, tall and not necessarily conventionally handsome. But he had this charm about him. He was popular, but for some reason, he said he liked me, and we started going out. We talked about our families, and he told me about his parents and sister. I lost my parents in an accident when I was young and grew up in an orphanage. It was a big deal for me, but when we started dating, I told him about my past. He said, "That sounds tough, but I'll always be there for you." And then he asked me to marry him. Right from the start, my husband wanted us to get married, so he quickly introduced me to his parents. During the meeting, I shared about my time growing up in an orphanage. They listened carefully and assured me that it wouldn't affect our marriage. It made me really happy. They even said that my background had no bearing on being part of their family, which warmed my heart. Only my sister-in-law, who was very close to her brother, seemed surprised, asking, "You grew up in an orphanage?" My husband had to talk to her about it. Looking back, she probably didn't like me from the start. But I didn't dwell on it then. I just thought we were getting to know each other. Before we got married, my husband and I talked about moving in with his parents. We thought about it seriously, but in the end, I decided not to leave my job. It turned out my husband was going to be transferred soon anyway. I thought about quitting to go with him, but my career was going strong, and I had just been given more responsibilities. After discussing it, we decided he would move alone. After tying the knot, I wanted to enjoy that newlywed bliss for a while. I even casually thought about visiting my husband during long weekends for a little getaway. The idea of moving in with my in-laws right after marriage seemed a bit daunting, but my husband probably felt more comfortable living with them. Plus, he likely wanted to reassure his always worried mother by having us all under one roof. Since I lost my parents early on, I'd always longed for a family, so living with them didn't sound too bad. Besides, my in-laws had always treated me kindly, and I'd grown fond of them. Juggling work and my responsibilities as a daughter-in-law was tough, but having a family made me happy and fulfilled. Then one day, my father-in-law approached me with an unexpected request. This marked the beginning of some tension in our seemingly happy living arrangement. It was a time when my overly anxious mother-in-law, who tended to be a bit controlling with my father-in-law, was out shopping. I was about to start cleaning on my day off when my father-in-law asked to talk to me. "What's up?" "Well, I don't want my wife to find out, but I'm taking a leave from work." "Wait, a leave?" He explained that he'd been having issues with his boss and colleagues, and his health had gotten so bad that he had no choice but to take time off. My mother-in-law is generally a kind person, but she's always on edge and a bit obsessive. Living with them, I started to notice her anxious habits and how my father-in-law walked on eggshells around her to avoid upsetting her. He had always been slim, but looking back, I realized he had lost even more weight recently. It would have been comforting if my mother-in-law showed genuine concern about his weight loss. Instead, when he took a sick day for a cold before, she commented, "A cold. Everyone else at your level is already at the top. It's because you're always taking time off for silly reasons like colds. That's why you're not getting promoted." Rather than being caring, she was the type to be critical. He probably tried to soldier on no matter how bad he felt. But his health kept declining, and he started taking more sick days to secretly visit the hospital. he was really struggling both mentally and physically. With his frequent early departures, lateness, and days off, there was talk of him possibly needing to take a break from work. But my father-in-law was hesitant to upset my mother-in-law in any way. If he even suggested taking time off, she'd likely explode with anger. Plus, my father-in-law didn't earn much, and he relied on overtime pay, so taking a break would mean a significant drop in income. If he told my husband, he'd probably end up telling my mother-in-law, so he came to me, asking if I could help with the bills. If I mentioned taking a break, she might even leave me. Those words hit me hard. I was grateful to my in-laws for accepting me warmly, regardless of my background growing up in an institution. Determined to be there for them, I decided to assist him during this tough period. I understand. I'll send money to your account every month. Use it for expenses. I'm really sorry. I'll try my best to get better soon and go back to work. Thank you for trusting me. After that, my father-in-law continued his routine of pretending to go to work while I sent money to his bank account for living expenses. My mother-in-law, who wasn't very meticulous with her finances, never noticed my transfers because she didn't check her bank statements closely or keep track of household expenses. Meanwhile, my father-in-law would pretend to head to work, but instead visit a mental health clinic or take walks in the peaceful mountains. Over time, his health seemed to improve. I hoped he'd be back to work soon, but then something unexpected happened. After a disagreement with her husband, my sister-in-law decided to go back to her parents' home. There's no place like home. I felt like I was going crazy living with that idiot husband of mine. I'll be staying here for a while. Can you make meals for me too? I knew right from the start that my sister-in-law wasn't fond of me. At our first family gathering, my husband was visibly upset because of her obvious disapproval. During our wedding, she wore a sour expression the whole time and even told me straight to my face, "My brother looks great, but you? He could have done better." She didn't hide her disdain for me, mentioning that it was embarrassing that I grew up without parents to attend the wedding. However, since she got married before us and had already moved out, I figured our interactions would be limited. That's why I thought living with them wouldn't be too bad. If she had still been living at home, I wouldn't have even considered moving in, knowing I'd have to deal with her constant criticism. Despite her stern attitude towards my father-in-law, I assumed her stay was temporary because of her marital issues and expected her to leave within a few days. My mother-in-law had always been kind to me, and even when my sister-in-law made snarky remarks, I trusted that my mother-in-law would stand up for me. But I was mistaken. One evening, when I came home from work, my mother-in-law's demeanor seemed off. "Is everything okay?" I asked. She seemed distant, not engaging in our usual conversation. When I inquired, she said, "Did you know you've been speaking ill of me behind my back?" "What? I've never said anything negative about you. You've always treated me well, and I'm genuinely grateful. Why would I say anything bad? You've been acting like the perfect daughter-in-law, but you've been gossiping about me in secret." "Fine, whatever," I replied, and she left the room. As she walked away, my sister-in-law smirked. "Looks like you've fallen out of favor. Did your true colors come out? Your upbringing in an institution is really showing, huh? It's better not to gossip about people." "I haven't said anything bad about her." "Oh, it seems the neighbors heard you. When I returned after so long, they mentioned that you've been constantly criticizing her." "What? Who? Are these neighbors?" "Well, it's been a while since I got married and moved out, so I've kind of forgotten their names. I never said any of those things. Stop making things up." "Oh my, how rude of you, Mom. You're accusing me of lying and bullying," she said, storming into my mother-in-law's room. From that moment on, my sister-in-law's nasty behavior only got worse. She accused me of telling her to sleep in the hallway and take the last bath because she's just a guest. She nitpicked about every little thing and complained to my mother-in-law. Each time, I had to defend myself, explaining that I hadn't said or done any of those things. But my mother-in-law seemed completely swayed by my sister-in-law's words, falling under her influence. My sister-in-law carried on as if she had no intention of leaving anytime soon, leaving me worried sick as I headed home with a heavy heart. "I'm back," I announced, hoping for the usual warm greeting from my mother-in-law. Instead, there was silence. "I'll start dinner," I said, stepping into the living room, only to be greeted by a shocking sight. Normally, my sister-in-law would rush me to prepare dinner, but now my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and sister-in-law were all enjoying sushi together. Surprised, my sister-in-law remarked, "Looks like someone who's not part of the family is home. You're not planning on having sushi, are you?" Without a glance in my direction, my mother-in-law continued eating while watching TV. "If you wanted sushi, you should have said so." I hurried back after shopping. "Huh, no one mentioned that," I sighed. "Hey Mom, Dad, I hung out with my friends today and brought back some delicious pudding. Let's enjoy it together." My sister-in-law chimed in, ignoring me completely as they all began eating the pudding. Exhausted from work and lacking the energy to confront them, I retreated to my room without eating. The next day, my sister-in-law mentioned she was meeting friends and asked if I could drop her off at the station. I declined, as it was a work day, and we weren't heading the same way. "Come on, take a day off. It's not a big deal. Your dear sis-in-law just wants a lift. She hasn't had much fun since getting married, right? Can't you be a bit nicer?" Respectfully, "Didn't you go out with friends last night after a late call? It seems like you've been going out almost every day since you got back." "I have work. Please take the bus or train," I replied. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were whispering in the background, but I had enough. I headed to work. That night, however, the moment that convinced me to leave happened. I was delayed at work and returned home after picking up groceries, expecting some sort of scolding. It had been raining heavily when I left the office, and I was soaked even getting in and out of the car. I wondered what unpleasant surprise awaited me at home, but when I arrived, the three of them were eating takeout just like the day before. No greeting, as if they hadn't even noticed I'd returned. But I've grown accustomed to this treatment. Glancing towards the courtyard from the hallway, I noticed something placed in the center of the garden. Upon closer inspection, it was my belongings. A designer bag I bought with my first paycheck, shoes that were a birthday gift from my husband, and even my work computer, now soaked. Shocked, I stood frozen as my sister-in-law smirked and remarked, "Having a stranger's things in the house was gross, so I got rid of them." Flaunting a designer bag like that? How arrogant. Neither of my in-laws said a word about her appalling behavior. Why didn't you intervene? What have I done to deserve this treatment? Do you truly believe her lies about me badmouthing and bullying her? Aren't you angry with her for what she did? My mother-in-law avoided eye contact, remaining silent. "Why won't you speak up? I can't talk to strangers. I can't be friendly with someone who isn't family," she finally replied, still refusing to acknowledge me. My sister-in-law grinned, waiting for my response. "And where's my father-in-law? I'm the one supporting him during his time off. I'm the one contributing to the household finances. Yes, I did it out of gratitude, but shouldn't he stand up for me now? Surely, he would be on my side." Hoping for some support, I looked to him, but he brushed past me without a word and retreated to his room. That was the final straw for me. "I've had enough. Are you upset?" "I'm sorry, but let's be honest. I never liked you from the start. What with your background growing up in an institution? Just don't regret this like I would loser." I gathered my belongings and prepared to leave immediately. Only my father-in-law seemed flustered, realizing he depended on me financially. Yet he made no attempt to stop me or defend me. I was utterly disillusioned by his indifference. I drove to my husband's distant work assignment, eager to leave the turmoil of my in-laws' house behind as soon as possible. Throughout the journey, I never once opened up to my husband about what had been happening. I doubted my mother-in-law had informed him about my sister-in-law's return. If he had known, he would have surely reached out to me, aware of the strained relationship between us. Yet my husband never mentioned anything about my sister-in-law in his calls or messages. While I didn't sense anything unusual in my husband's behavior, I couldn't shake the feeling that he might be influenced by her, fed lies about various matters. Even now, as I made my way to him, I couldn't shake the fear that he would treat me with the same indifference as the others. My heart ached with exhaustion, torn by suspicion, even toward my husband, the person I trusted most. If he shared their mindset and attitude, perhaps divorce was the only solution. That's how deeply distressed I felt. When I arrived at his out-of-state apartment, he hadn't returned yet, likely caught up with end-of-month work obligations. As I waited, my husband energetically walked in, perhaps noticing the lights on. "What if I knew you were coming?" "I would have rushed home," he exclaimed. "What a pleasant surprise. Just seeing your face." His radiant smile immediately lifted my spirits. The relief of seeing him genuinely happy to see me, combined with the lingering humiliation from my in-laws' home, overwhelmed me, and I couldn't hold back the flood of emotions any longer. Tears streamed down my face as I broke down in his arms. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" "Please tell me," my husband implored, clearly unaware of the treatment I endured at his parents' home. Gathering myself, I knew I needed to explain everything to him clearly. I recounted the whole ordeal. How I'd been supporting his father financially, who had taken medical leave without informing his wife. How his sister had returned and poisoned his mother against me with lies. How they treated me as an outsider, ignored me, and left my belongings out in the rain, ruining them. Through tears and pauses, I laid it all out for him. Finally, I made it clear that I had no intention of ever going back to that house, and if he couldn't support me on this, I'd seek a divorce. My husband apologized for being too preoccupied with work and not checking in on me more often, expressing regret over his family's behavior toward me. "You don't have to go back there or even speak to them," he assured me. "Even if I were to forgive them, I'm cutting ties with my parents and sister." He also vowed to stop providing financial aid to his father. That night, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The tension dissolved, and I slept peacefully by his side. After leaving my in-laws' house, I never returned. While commuting from my husband's out-of-state location wasn't feasible, I had already discussed with my company the possibility of working remotely. Since my sister-in-law and mother-in-law had begun treating me harshly, my job didn't necessarily require me to be in the office all the time. Many of my colleagues and supervisors also worked remotely. Although I still needed to visit the office a few times a month, several colleagues lived even farther away, so transitioning to remote work wasn't an issue. I hadn't truly experienced married life since moving in with his family and dealing with my sister-in-law's bullying. But now we could finally live like newlyweds. As I was setting up my remote workstation, as expected, my sister-in-law contacted me. It turned out that the day after I left their house was the day my father-in-law was supposed to get paid. Usually, my mother-in-law withdrew a certain amount and transferred it to their household account on payday, but this time she couldn't. Of course not. Until now, I have been supplementing my father-in-law's reduced salary due to his time off, I thought. Upon checking their balance, my mother-in-law confronted him, and he confessed that I had been helping them financially. "Hey, why didn't you tell me you were covering the living expenses?" "He told me not to, saying he didn't want you to know, so I kept it a secret. Anyway, we're running out of money for living expenses, and there's no one to cook or do laundry. The room is a mess. As his wife, you need to come back and take care of these things and transfer money quickly." How heartless. I told you, didn't I? I don't regret this. I have no intention of going back to that house or continuing as your maid. Why should I help people who hate me, destroy my belongings, and treat me like this? Aren't you his wife? Without your help, we can't pay the electricity or gas bills. We can't even go shopping. That's why I said it. I'm an outsider, so it's none of my business, right? I hung up, ignoring my sister-in-law's ranting. Despite their relentless calls and messages, I continued to ignore my sister-in-law and mother-in-law. Even after my husband returned from work, they persisted in their attempts to contact us. When my husband finally answered, he firmly declared, "I'll never forgive you for how you treated her, and I'm never sending her back to you." I'm not coming back either. I don't consider you my family anymore. Stay away from my wife, or you'll regret it. Given my sister-in-law's affection for her brother and my mother-in-law's dependence on him, they were likely shocked by his words. A few days later, my father-in-law reached out, pleading for continued financial assistance. Despite their acceptance of me, a girl from an orphanage, into their family, I couldn't overlook their lack of support during my time of need, despite all the help I had provided. I don't owe them anything. Why should I help those who ignored me? I'll never assist you again, I firmly stated before ending the call. Subsequently, my persistent mother-in-law and sister-in-law audaciously appeared at my workplace. Anticipating trouble, I had informed my company beforehand and security was immediately alerted. They caused a scene, demanding that I send money back home. Upon hearing this, my husband insisted, report them to the police. My colleagues at work were supportive, expressing disbelief at my past living situation. Focus on your remote work, they encouraged. Meanwhile, the pressure from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law took a toll on my father-in-law's health, leading to his resignation. My sister-in-law attempted to return to her husband's family, only to be rejected due to her affair, which had been the original cause of their conflict. This incident exacerbated their problems, resulting in an immediate divorce. Left without a home, my in-laws and sister-in-law relocated to a modest apartment, finding employment in part-time positions to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my husband and I finally found peace and fulfillment in our lives. Recently, we received the joyful news of our impending parenthood and eagerly await the arrival of our child, cherishing each moment together.
When I asked James why he made a family card for his in-laws, he laughed and said, "They're my family, so they should have one, right? You got a problem with that?" He added, "If you knew who helped you when you were alone, you wouldn't talk like that, would you?" His confident tone surprised me. Was James always like this? He asked. "If you're grateful, you should do more for my family. Then you'll be part of it. Until then, you're like you're on a trial." I never heard of a trial in marriage before. James explained. I was silent. "It means you're not fully part of the family yet. If you don't like it, you can leave any time. For now, our family is just the 6 of us." I was shocked, so I canceled our shared credit cards and moved out right away. "Hi, I'm Olivia Cook, and I'm 30 years old. I draw pictures for a living, working from home as a freelancer. Before that, I used to design stuff for a big ad company, but I started doing my own thing about 5 years ago when I got married. My folks passed away in a crash when I was little, so my grandparents raised me. But I moved back to my parents' old place in the city center for college, and have been there ever since. I met my hubby James at this Italian joint where he worked. It was a cozy spot with good food at decent prices, so me and my work buddies went there a lot. James, the charming waiter, caught everyone's eye, including mine. He was quite the looker. The manager even joked that some folks came just to see him, and I totally got why. Can't deny, I was a bit of a fan myself. He had this cool vibe that really stood out. We grew closer pretty fast, and before we knew it, folks were calling us a couple. Surprisingly, we ended up tying the knot. I don't remember much from that time. It's like I was in a bit of a fog. Next thing I knew, I was married to James, my husband. But I did love him, and I was genuinely happy about getting married. I left my job at the design company on good terms and started freelancing. James stuck with his gig at the Italian joint, working odd hours, sometimes late into the night. It got tough to juggle work, so I decided to go solo, something I'd always wanted to do. That sounds smart, Olivia. It'll be easier for you, and it's great to keep doing what you love. James backed me up. And that's how we kicked off our married life. We weren't into big flashy stuff, so we skipped the whole wedding hoopla and just signed the papers. Our families met briefly, and that was that. James went to work, and I held down the fort at home, managing chores and freelancing. Our schedules were all over the place, but we made it a point to have meals together whenever we could. It was simple, but it made us happy. I thought, yeah, marriage is pretty sweet. About a year into our marriage, things took a turn for the worse. My family wants to visit. Is that cool? James asked one day. Sure, I replied. I was actually looking forward to it. I'd only had a brief encounter with James's family before, so I figured this would be a good chance to bond with them. Having lost my own parents early on, I always admired James's big family, but when they arrived, 5 of them, I was left stunned. "Hey, which room's mine?" his sister blurted out as soon as they stepped in. She's 35, 3 years older than both James and me, and works at a local store. Her abruptness caught me off guard. She seemed so different from the polite person I'd met before. James's 22-year-old sister was there too, but she stayed quiet, barely saying a word, just like when we first met. Following James's sister's hurried lead, I shoved them to the guest room, and James's parents to my parents' old room, the only one in Japanese style. I thought it'd suit them best. Once they settled into their rooms, James's sister declared, "Well, since we're all under the same roof now, you better start treating our family right." I was puzzled by her words, but when I turned to James for clarification, he simply chuckled in a way I'd never heard before. "Turns out, they'd given up their place and moved in here without telling me," he explained. "Sorry, our family home had to be vacated suddenly, and they had nowhere else to go. I wish he'd informed me earlier. I had assumed it was just for a day or two, not a long." James's family didn't hold back. From the moment they moved in, all 4 of them expected me to handle everything while they did nothing, saying whatever they pleased. They made no effort to find jobs or a place of their own. When I asked about their employment, I got yet another surprise. "Oh, I quit that awful job at the supermarket," his sister confessed. She was working, but it turned out to be just a part-time gig. I'd assumed she had a full-time job given her age, but she admitted she hadn't held a steady job since high school. James's parents also had part-time jobs they gave up before moving in, and his other sister, well, she was unemployed. She claimed to be a student, but that wasn't true. "Why should I work when I'm part of a well-off family now?" she reasoned. When I asked who she was referring to, I received another startling response. "You obviously. You received a hefty settlement and insurance payout after your parents' accident, and you don't even have a mortgage on this place. You can live comfortably without having to work," James's sister remarked, chuckling. I voiced my concerns to James when he returned home, but he erupted in a manner I'd never witnessed before. "Everyone's exhausted from being suddenly uprooted. Give them some time to recuperate. Or do you want to kick out my family, Olivia?" I was stunned into silence. Then, abruptly, James softened his tone. "I'm sorry for yelling. It's been a tough day for me too. Can you please try to be a bit more understanding?" Looking back, James was adept at manipulating situations with a blend of kindness and severity. But in that moment, I failed to see it, agreeing to endure a bit longer. The situation with James's family grew more oppressive. They treated me like a servant at home and demanded money whenever they went out. "We can't even look for jobs without some cash, can we? It's only fair, but if we can't find work, we'll just keep staying here," they reasoned. Reluctantly, I handed over some money, which they claimed to have used up without any luck in the job hunt. I suspected they never even bothered to search, but pointing that out would only lead to accusations without proof. And then James's entire family would lay blame on me for hours. Sharing my concerns with James didn't solve anything. Everyone's feeling frustrated about not finding jobs. "Sorry, just bear with it a little longer. I'll have a talk with them," James would say, attempting to smooth things over. But as time passed, I felt like speaking up was futile. However, the frequency of their money requests gradually decreased, perhaps because James had a word with them. So the issue seemed to resolve itself. Of course, the money I had given them was never returned. Then, after about 2 months of enduring the situation, I noticed something alarming. Why is the credit card bill so high? Could it be unauthorized charges? Quickly checking the statement, I found that all the expenses were made with family credit cards. The purchases ranged from food and drinks to books, games, and even luxury brand bags and clothing. Each purchase was assigned a number from 1 to 6, indicating that 6 family credit cards had been issued. These credit cards were under my name, with James using the family cards. "It seems like you'd handle this better, and it's easier to manage payments, right? Can I entrust it to you?" he had asked, and I ended up taking charge of them. However, it turned out these family cards had been issued without my knowledge. James's family stopped requesting money because they could now make credit card payments and withdraw cash. When I confronted James about why he made family cards for his in-laws without consulting me, he chuckled and replied, "Well, you complain when they say they're broke, so what else could I do? Plus, you know who supported you when you were alone, right? Can you really speak like that to the important family of your benefactor?" His bold tone left me speechless, unlike anything I'd heard before. Was James always like this? "If you're thankful you should do more for my family, then I'll accept you as part of the family too. Until then, think of it like you're still in a trial period," he continued. I'd never heard of a trial period in marriage before. Seeing my silence, James pushed on. "This means you're not officially part of the family yet. If you're not okay with it, you're free to leave anytime. Right now, it's just the 5 of us in our family. Useless freeloaders. Leave," he concluded. That's when I realized James's true character. I felt like all the color drained from my face. Stunned, I contemplated divorcing James. In fact, I began questioning why I even married him in the first place. At first, I was drawn to him simply because he was attractive, like many other women. I was infatuated with his looks without any real reason. Then, on one occasion when I went to the restroom, James approached me. "You seem different, Olivia. Kind of mysterious." "Sorry, I shouldn't say that to a customer," he said. I was taken aback but intrigued, and I found myself paying more attention to him over time. Maybe that was his strategy to make me like him. Looking back calmly, it all adds up. I remember once a colleague joked that I was a wealthy lady living alone in a condo, and it was after that James started chatting with me, perhaps because he was interested in my wealth and condo. Honestly, James wasn't exactly my type, to put it nicely. He was more modern, if I'm being blunt. He seemed a bit superficial. I preferred mature men who spoke softly and seriously. Yet, somehow, I ended up falling for James. I always found that perplexing, considering he was the typical handsome guy who could easily charm a woman, especially someone like me, who was new to the working world and not accustomed to men. I fell for his tricks and ended up marrying him. Thinking about it now left me feeling frustrated and ashamed. I wanted to lash out and break things around the house, but I knew better than to act on that impulse. Instead, I resolved to seek revenge. To accomplish that, I had to endure this situation a while longer, much like James manipulated me. My plan was to gain control over his entire family. The condo we lived in was purchased by my father with a mortgage shortly after I was born. It wasn't very costly back then, but with the rapid development of the area and the addition of a new shopping center nearby, it's now considered a luxury residence. My parents, hopeful for more children, invested in a spacious condo. That's why there's enough space, even with James's family moving in. However, despite its ample size, having James's family around proved to be a nuisance for me, especially while working from home. I endured it solely for the sake of revenge. As James's sister pointed out, there's no mortgage payment for this condo. When I was 4, both of my parents tragically died in a car accident. They were returning from my paternal grandfather's funeral when they collided with a speeding car on the freeway. I was supposed to accompany them that day, but I had caught the flu that was circulating and had a high fever. Consequently, my maternal grandparents came to the condo where we resided with my parents to care for me, leaving me as the sole survivor. The mortgage payments were covered by the group credit life insurance, so the only housing costs I incurred were the management fees and property taxes. Upon seeing the amount, James proposed contributing just a bit more than that to our household expenses. Since there's no mortgage, if I pitch in that much, we should be able to manage with Olivia's income, right? We'll each use our own earnings for personal expenses. Sounds fair, doesn't it? He suggested. I agreed, thinking perhaps he had a point. Until then, I had been solely responsible for all expenses, so I believed his contribution would alleviate some of my burden. Looking back, it was naive of me, but at the time, I was blinded by my love for James and simply went along with whatever he proposed. James likely sees himself as the head of the household and the one providing for me, which is why he can so casually refer to me as a parasite. However, the reality was starkly different. I was the one footing most of the bills, covering expenses like utilities, groceries, social outings, and entertainment. Now, with 5 additional dependents in the household, managing with just my income was becoming impossible. I was eager to rid myself of this burden as soon as possible, but I feigned ignorance and endured it. Gritting my teeth, I watched as James's family freely indulged in shopping sprees, reminding myself that I would have the last laugh. Then, 5 months after making the decision to divorce, the moment to take action finally arrived. I'm exhausted. It's time to make a choice. It's either me or your family, I told James, presenting him with an ultimatum. He was taken aback, but I pressed on without hesitation. None of your family members lift a finger to help around the house. They just dump all their chores on me. You know I work from home. I'm not idly passing the time. Yet they treat me like a freeloader and belittle me, claiming you're the one supporting me. I've had enough. I cried as I confronted James. His response was a smirk. Then you should leave. Didn't I warn you before? You're not truly part of this family yet. Giving up now means you haven't earned your place in it, he retorted. I feigned shock as I looked at him. What's surprising? If you can't tolerate my family, then it's you who must leave. And since I'm not to blame, I'll take this apartment as alimony and I'll claim half of your savings as part of the property settlement. Ah, so that was his scheme all along. That's why his entire family had been hounding me, attempting to drive me away. I had suspected it, but hearing it articulated so plainly still came as a shock. It was someone I had once loved and married, but thanks to this revelation, I made up my mind. Fine, I declared, resolved to divorce James. But this condo belongs to me, and I'm not at fault either. What did you say? The grounds for the divorce are your family moving in without my consent and your family disrespecting me, I asserted firmly to James. He'd appeared taken aback by my outright rejection of his terms, not expecting such defiance. It was understandable, as I had always acquiesced to his demands since our marriage. Recalling those moments filled me with anger. I can't stand another moment with you all, so I'll leave now. But be prepared to vacate as well. This is ridiculous. This is our home. We won't leave. Ever heard of tenant rights? You can't just evict us from our own home, James shouted. Ignoring his protests, I left the house and sought refuge at my grandparents' home. I divulged everything to them and requested shelter until matters were resolved. My grandparents were appalled by what I had endured and scolded me for not seeking their counsel sooner. With tears in their eyes, they embraced me. I'm sorry, Grandma, Grandpa. I know I worried you, but I'll be all right now, I reassured them, forcing a laugh through my tears. The day after I left the apartment, James wasted no time in contacting me. What's all this about? What mail are you talking about? He inquired about the certified letter. I was impressed by how swiftly things were progressing. I had entrusted the divorce proceedings to a lawyer, and upon informing them of my departure yesterday, they had arranged for everything to be handled promptly today. I'm not paying any alimony, and I'm not leaving the condo, James asserted. However, legally he was obligated to pay, and he had no right to remain in the apartment. What do you mean? The condo is jointly owned since we're married. If that's your stance, then compensate me for half its value to buy out my share, he insisted, making an absurd claim. Continuing this discussion is futile. Please communicate through my lawyer from now on, I stated firmly, ending the call. I anticipated he would likely call again the next day, but I had no desire to engage in further conversation that day. As expected, he rang me the following morning. What's all this about? He repeated the same line as the day before, displaying a lack of originality. What mail are you referring to? The card's not working. What did you do? What I did was cancel it. That card belonged to me, and you were merely an authorized user on the family card, remember? Indeed, before leaving the house, I had transferred all the accounts linked to that card to another one and terminated it. Naturally, the family cards would cease to function when I canceled mine. I was the one covering the expenses, I explained. Yes, you covered the management fees and property taxes for the first 4 months only. It's not substantial, but I can deduct that from the alimony if you prefer, I mocked him. I heard some muffled shouting from the other end of the line. That's right, James had only paid the agreed amount for just 4 months. He had concocted various excuses about work and other matters, always finding a pretext to postpone payment. Then he abruptly ceased all payments. If he forgot and assumed he was still paying, that's quite a lapse in memory, but I didn't concern myself with it anymore. He's someone I'm severing ties with. His memory holds no significance to me. That's the situation, so please reimburse your share of the living expenses I've been covering. I've meticulously documented our household expenditures, which I'll utilize as evidence to equitably divide our savings. It's marital property, he insisted. Yes, understood. Let's divide it accordingly, I acquiesced. He concluded the call with a reminder not to overlook it. A few days later, he called again with the same inquiry. I realized they were not only deficient in memory but also in vocabulary. What do you mean by the division of shared property? Why is it zero? You must be swimming in cash from your parents' insurance and alimony, he alleged. Ah, so that's what they assumed. I patiently clarified that my pre-marriage savings were not part of the shared property, and since we had accumulated no savings during our marriage, it naturally amounted to zero. Don't accuse me of deceit. If you doubt my honesty, why not seek advice? Henceforth, kindly communicate through my attorney. I won't engage in direct communication with you any longer. Farewell, I declared, then terminated the call and blocked James' number. 1 month after my departure, James and his family finally vacated the apartment, not due to a change of heart, but because they could no longer sustain their lifestyle. Predictably, James's income alone couldn't support a family of 5. Accustomed to lavish spending with my card, asking them to tighten their belts was out of the question. I had intentionally allowed them to use the card for this purpose, knowing it would lead to this outcome. His family began badgering James for shopping funds, and when he refused, they resorted to pilfering from his wallet. Even in his anger, they blamed him for my departure. To compound their troubles, the utilities, electricity, gas, and water were all disconnected. Of course, I had arranged for this since I had no intention of residing there. James attempted to have the utilities swiftly reinstated by phone, but since the house was in my name, no one else could restore them if the owner had ordered their termination. During the scorching summer and early autumn, his family struggled to endure the sweltering heat and eventually vacated the condo. Their destination, I neither knew nor cared. James endeavored to persist until the end, but he ultimately capitulated due to the absence of electricity and the inability to bathe. The divorce proceedings progressed more rapidly than anticipated, not because James had a change of heart, but because of his blunders. He betrayed our marriage by pursuing someone else. Perhaps assuming he could swiftly remove me from the picture, he boasted about owning a luxurious downtown apartment, using it as bait to attract younger women. It's astonishing he engaged in such behavior with his family present, but it wasn't out of character for him, so they turned a blind eye. Prior to departing, I had discreetly installed cameras throughout the house, capturing all the evidence. Perhaps he underestimated me, but his disrespect was undeniable. He brought his family into my home without consent, racked up expenses on a family card and left me with a bill, ousted me, and engaged in infidelity. I demanded significant compensation and alimony for these transgressions. When James saw the amount, he visibly paled and begged desperately for reconciliation. However, I harbored no such intentions. Aware of his inability to pay, I pressured him to borrow as much as possible from his company and seized whatever assets I could. When I threatened legal action for fraudulent use of the family card, he reluctantly agreed to my terms. I can only hope he makes diligent efforts to repay his debts. The divorce is now finalized and I am currently residing at my grandparents' place. I haven't decided what to do with the apartment yet. While it held sentimental value as an inheritance from my late parents, given the circumstances and lack of memories associated with it, I may opt to sell it. On the professional front, my career as an illustrator is flourishing. I may soon live independently again. But for now, I'm content working from my grandparents' home. I'll continue to rely on their support for a little while longer before forging ahead with renewed determination. In the future, I'll be more discerning in choosing a partner, prioritizing qualities beyond mere attractiveness. My hope is to find a life partner with whom I can share my journey.
As I walked down the apartment hallway, tired from work, suddenly someone from the neighboring apartment grabbed my arm. Confused and scared, I screamed as I was dragged inside. It was my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, who apologized, claiming he had no choice. Suspicious, I pulled away, demanding an explanation. He nervously said, "Actually, my name is Luna." Now, let me tell you about my life. I'm 24, working in a well-known trading company. I enjoy the freedom of living alone in a city apartment, earning my own money. I grew up with a single mom who struggled to provide, but she never gave me an allowance. Despite her reasonable income, she was labeled a toxic parent. I moved out to escape her control, and I'll share our story. I was born and raised in a town near New York City. My childhood home was remote, making life difficult without a car or bus. Raised by my single mom, I should be grateful, but her restrictions created resentment. In elementary school, I asked for an allowance, but she refused, claiming money could lead to trouble. Despite promises, she never bought what I wanted. Birthdays were filled with disappointing educational books, and I realized my mom was different from my friends' parents. Every day, I desperately tried to find a way to escape my parents' control. Through middle and high school, it only intensified. Not only did I not get an allowance, but I also had to report and get permission for everything, whether it was hanging out with friends or going on dates. Once, after sneaking out to meet my boyfriend, I faced my mother's furious reaction the next morning. She declared that I would go without meals for the next 3 days. Without an allowance, I couldn't even buy food outside. Too embarrassed to let my friends or boyfriend know about my toxic mom, I couldn't ask them for something as simple as a snack. After 3 days of hunger, my concerned boyfriend approached me, asking if I was okay. Unable to hold back my tears, I'd opened up about my mother. I still remember the shock on his face. Although he sympathized at first, he began avoiding me afterward. 2 weeks later, I overheard him telling his friends that my mom seemed like a real problem, and he didn't want to deal with it. He thought I was desperate and kind of scary. Hearing him talk like that made me realize he felt bothered by my toxic mom, not wanting to protect me but feeling alienated. Overwhelmed with frustration and tears, I quietly slipped away to a corner of the hallway, realizing it was over with him still having feelings for him. I had to abruptly end my love for him, filled with anger towards my mom. When I got home, I lashed out at her, questioning why she had to control me. I blamed her for my boyfriend leaving, and my friends distancing themselves because of her abnormal behavior. Frustrated, I vented at her, only to find her pleased that my relationship had ended. Her self-indulgent response deepened my despair. My mother couldn't understand my feelings, and her sense of righteousness ignored common sense. Controlling my life was her reason for living. Feeling dizzy and unable to contain myself, I rushed to my room. Closing the door, I cried, wishing for a lock that my mother, who enjoyed controlling me, would never allow. My mother's concerned voice interrupted, asking if I was eating dinner. Her words weighed heavy on my chest. After high school, determined to live alone, I vowed to become a college student. I channeled my frustration into studying for exams as revenge. I secretly started a part-time job, faking my mother's signature. Gradually, I earned scholarships and slipped into the acceptance range of a New York public university. When I finally told my mother about my achievements, she smiled sweetly, praising my hard work. However, her reference to University, a nearby public university, signaled that I wouldn't be allowed to live on my own. It was just a 20-minute commute from home. Despite choosing a university within New York, my mother insisted on a different one in a neighboring town. This left me feeling uneasy, as she continued trying to control me even as I was about to become a college student. Rejecting the idea of University, I expressed my desire for our chosen university. In response, my mother sternly dismissed it, insisting on University and questioning my chances of getting in. Frustrated and unable to hold back tears, I turned away from my mother and rushed to my room. Even as a college student, I couldn't escape her control. Balancing exams and part-time work was tough, and despite my efforts, it all seemed unnecessary. The frustration affected my sleep, leading me to take the entrance exam for University, getting in as expected. Before I knew it, I was a college student, and my mother surprised me with a smartphone as a celebration gift. It was a remarkable shift from her previous controlling behavior. With the smartphone, I felt liberated, like a fish in water, thoroughly enjoying college life. Making new friends and engaging in normal communication, I also focused on my future, participating in student organizations and volunteer activities. Rather than joining clubs or sports teams, I applied what I learned to secure a position at the most famous trading company in the States, located in New York. Finally, as a working adult, I got to live on my own. My mother congratulated me on my job, presenting me with a $2,000 wallet as a gift. Over the past few years, her control over me had considerably loosened. Despite past resentment, I genuinely thanked her for everything as I began living apart from her. In the end, I decided to express my gratitude, and my mother's response was, "It's nothing. Just take care and do your best." Despite her recent change in attitude, I didn't question why she was so willing to let me go. Looking back, I should have been more suspicious, understanding that my mother wouldn't easily let me go. Nevertheless, I ended up living alone in a town near the center of New York City. The rent was high, but my company's housing allowance made my personal expenses around $600 a month. The apartment building wasn't large, and I would recognize the faces of fellow residents. I lived in a corner room on the third floor, and next door lived a man named Johnson. While we exchanged greetings, our interactions were limited. Johnson seemed about 5 years older, with a slender build and a kind appearance. In New York, neighborly interactions are usually indifferent, so beyond a simple hello, I rarely spoke with Johnson. Fortunately, he didn't seem like a strange person. I kept my apartment secret from my mother, as I didn't want her showing up unannounced. When she asked about my address, I simply said, "I'll be back soon," and left it at that. She seemed a bit down but accepted it, saying, "Well, that's fine." Despite being focused on my work computer, my mother frequently called or texted me. During work, I received calls that interrupted my concentration, leading to irritation. The demanding job at the trading company, coupled with my mother's constant calls, made the situation challenging. Not just calls, but she kept sending messages, resulting in a flood of unread notifications. A chill ran down my spine, and a concerned colleague noticed my strained expression. I reassured them, "It's nothing," and managed to maintain composure, continuing my work. 2 years passed in this manner, and at the age of 24, my second-year salary was remarkably high. Earning money independently brought me deep joy. Gradually, I became more engrossed in work, increasingly ignoring calls from my mother. Since she didn't know where I lived, there was no chance of running into her unless I went home. The image of my mother slowly faded from my life, and I finally felt like I was living my own life. One day, after drinks with colleagues, I was tipsier than usual on my way home. Around 10 p.m., as I reached the third floor of my apartment building, I staggered towards my corner room, mumbling about another long day at work. Suddenly, a man's voice called out, "Luna, over here for a sec." I felt someone grab my arm from the next-door apartment entrance. In a moment of confusion, I screamed and was dragged inside. Furious, I shouted, "What on earth are you doing? I'm going to call the cops." My neighbor, Mr. Johnson, apologized, claiming he had no other choice. Suspicious, I shook off his grip and accused him of planning something. In the midst of my panic, Mr. Johnson urged me to calm down. However, his next words made me shudder. "I saw someone break into your apartment." Although I immediately thought it might be a trap, Johnson looked serious. Unfamiliar with such situations, I was more afraid of him than anything and tried to escape. Startled by his intense tone, I hesitated, and he urgently pleaded for me to wait, emphasizing the danger outside. At a crossroads and unsure whether to believe him, I saw desperation in Johnson's eyes. Though we had barely spoken, his eyes seemed direct and sincere. It was just a hunch, but I felt inclined to listen to him. Trembling, I asked about the break-in details, and Johnson began to explain. I couldn't see clearly, but the person wore all black, with long sleeves and pants, looking suspicious. I'd seen someone similar around the apartment complex before, thinking they were just another resident. About 3 hours ago, when I came home, I saw that person entering your apartment, and that's when I thought something was off. It's 10 p.m. now, so around 7:00 p.m. Wearing all black clothes in July isn't comfortable. However, the key issue is how someone could enter my house without having a key. Initially, I thought it might be a friend or your boyfriend, Luna, so I didn't pay much attention. However, When I heard you coming home just a while ago, I got shocked. Even if they were a friend or boyfriend, staying alone in someone else's home for 3 hours seemed strange. It hit me that this person could be dangerous, so I decided to stop you. Mr. Johnson's words made me tremble violently. If what he was saying was true, the intruder might still be hiding in my apartment. I haven't given my keys to anyone, don't have a boyfriend, and haven't made plans with any friends, ever since a harsh experience with a boyfriend in high school. I've avoided dating men, so I currently don't have a romantic partner or close friends nearby. Who could be breaking into my home? Luna, please calm down and listen. Have you been stalked by anyone recently? Johnson asked, trying to soothe my agitation. Stalked? No, nothing like that. I had no recollection of such a thing, but it was possible someone was stalking me without my knowledge. Maybe you just haven't noticed, but the perpetrator could have been acting this way for a while. Is there anyone, perhaps a romantic partner, with whom you had a falling out or argument? When Mr. Johnson asked me that, I thought about the men around me. Since a high school incident, I've been afraid to get involved with men, and I hadn't had any such relationships with my work colleagues. No, there's no one. I've been avoiding such things all this time. I couldn't think of anyone who might be the intruder. It seemed the only option left was to contact the police, but having never called 911 in my life, I hesitated to make the report. After all, the claim of an intruder in my house was solely based on Johnson's word. Should I really trust what this man is saying? I stared at my phone's call button, unable to press it, and impatiently, Johnson said he'd call the police. Just then, the doorbell rang, startling me, and I accidentally dropped my phone. Wondering who it could be at this time, I peeked through the peephole of Johnson's apartment door. Seeing the person in black clothes outside left me speechless. Mr. Johnson's voice was trembling too. He must be scared as well. Trying to steady my shaking body, I answered, "It's my mother." To Mr. Johnson, my response might have seemed anticlimactic. However, the fact that my mother was standing in front of Johnson's door next to my apartment brought an unbelievable amount of fear. What's going on? Mr. Johnson's voice trembled as well. Could it be that the person I mistook for a stalker was your mother? If so, I'm really sorry. That's a huge misunderstanding. I apologize. Mr. Johnson apologized to me, but I shook my head. No, it's not that. It's just that. I hesitated to tell Johnson that my mother was toxic and that I hadn't even given her the address of this apartment. Before I could, my mother banged on the door, saying, "Hello, excuse me. I think my daughter is in there. Could she come out, please?" My mother's loud voice echoed in the hallway, making me jump. How did she know where I live? And how did she know I was here? I flung open the door, and my mother said, "Oh, Luna, finally found you. I've been trying to contact you, but you've been ignoring me. I just wanted to see you so badly. I came here. Aren't you coming home yet?" Seeing my mother standing there as if it were the most natural thing made me feel nauseous. "Mom, how did you know where I live? And how did you know I was here?" I had so many questions, dressed all in black, just like Johnson described, like a stalker. And how did she know where my house and whereabouts were? Why was she sneaking around behind my back? Well, that's easy. I put GPS trackers in that smartphone and wallet. I was shocked by my mother's revelation. The smartphone and wallet were gifts for my mother for special occasions. I had been using the same smartphone for about 6 years, which means I've been monitored by my mother all this time. A chill ran down my spine, and I swallowed hard. At first, it was just a smartphone, but you sometimes leave it at home, right? So I thought if I put GPS trackers in both the phone and the wallet, you'd always have one with you. You're my precious daughter, Luna. I've always been worried about you, thinking what if something dangerous happened. Watching my mother speak so nonchalantly, I completely lost my composure. I thought that becoming a working adult meant I had finally gained true freedom, earning my own money, doing what I wanted when I wanted. I thought I could enjoy such basic freedoms that everyone else takes for granted. But it turned out I was just dancing in the palm of my mother's hand all along. If this continues, my life will forever be controlled by my mother. I can't stand that. I was done having my life thrown into disarray by my mother. Mom, I called out to her in a very calm voice. My mother responded in her usual clueless tone. Yes, what is it? I'm never going back home again, Mom. Whenever I'm with you, I feel like I'm always being restrained. It's always been like that, hasn't it? You call me your precious daughter, your beloved daughter, but you've stifled everything I wanted to do. You neatly clipped my wings every time I tried to spread them, using worry as a plausible excuse. Each time, it hurt me deeply and caused me great pain. I am not your possession, Mom. I have my own will as a person, and I don't want it to be tainted by anyone else. So, Mom, let's cut ties. Please don't ever contact me again or come to see me. In a final outburst, I shouted all my feelings at her. My mother, hearing my declaration of cutting ties for the first time, visibly paled. She must have been shocked to be defied like this, always assuming I would comply with her cutting ties. What? Why, I'm your mother, Luna. Look, I didn't come today to restrain you. That's right. I just thought of borrowing some money from you. That's all I came for. My mother, now in disarray, suddenly claimed she wanted to borrow money, which made no sense. Money? What are you talking about, Mom? Are you in debt? Were you planning to steal money from your daughter, who earns a lot? You never intended to borrow, did you? You sneaked into my apartment to steal money, right? Everything clicked about why she had been in my apartment for 3 hours. If she really wanted to see me, she would have called or texted. But there was no contact from her today. She must have planned to steal from me and then see me afterward. But I don't keep cash at home. My bank books are hidden where they can't be easily found. Frustrated that she couldn't fulfill her intention to steal, she just wanted to satisfy her desire to see me and came next door. Thinking this, I felt disgusted, even considering her as my mother. No, I just wanted to borrow a little. My mother, used to such confrontations, began to panic. I couldn't trust a single word she said anymore. Gathering all my strength, I yelled at her again, enough. A person who tries to steal from her own daughter is not a mother. Never show your face to me again. I'm canceling my phone. Goodbye. Ignoring my mother's wide-eyed expression, I forcefully shut Johnson's door. For a while, she kept shouting, Luna, I'm sorry. Please open the door. It seemed the neighbors found the commotion suspicious and called the police. I heard the sirens of a patrol car and my mother arguing with the police in the hallway. The police managed to take her out of the building. Exhausted, I slumped to the ground. Are you okay? Mr. Johnson asked, looking at me with concern. I'm sorry for involving you in a family fight because of my mother. No, it's okay. Just rest for today. Thankful for Mr. Johnson's kindness, I returned to my room and crawled into bed. I decided to sleep without thinking about anything. My consciousness slowly faded into darkness. As for what happened afterward, I separated my family register from my mother's to create some distance. Though legally I couldn't cut ties completely with my biological parent, having my name removed from her family register made me feel like I had escaped her control, and I felt a sense of relief. Furthermore, I threw away the smartphone and wallet my mother gave me, replaced them with new ones, and moved to a different apartment. Of course, I haven't shared my new phone number with my mother. Now she won't be able to pinpoint my whereabouts. After that incident at my apartment, my mother, who had received a stern warning from the police for causing a disturbance, apparently became reclusive. As she confessed, after I left home and started working, she indulged in high-end brands of clothes and bags to distract herself from loneliness, accumulating considerable debt. Eventually, she ran out of living expenses and resorted to borrowing from high-end lenders. She is now troubled daily by debt collectors. However, I couldn't bring myself to help her. The fact that she had controlled and monitored me, even using GPS, is a shocking event that I can never forgive and is etched in my heart. If cutting ties with her serves as a punishment for her, so be it. I plan to live in a world without my mother. Even after moving to my new apartment, I kept in touch with Johnson, my former neighbor. Initially, I reached out to thank him, but he continued to stay in contact, and now we even go out for meals together. Having refused romantic relationships with men for a long time, escaping from my mother's control has made me more open to love. If things go well with Johnson, it would ironically be thanks to my mother. But I want to build a bright future with Mr. Johnson away from my mother's knowledge.